The United States has seen 43 presidents in its time as a relatively young country. Today we'll talk about some of the most influential of the bunch to lead America. Number 16. Lyndon B Johnson. Starting off our list is the man who didn't know he'd become president, at least not then and there.
Lyndon B Johnson took over the reins as leader of the United States after the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963.
Many referred to him as LBJ. He served as the 36th president between 1963 and 1969. Before that, he served not only as the 37th vice president, but also as a majority leader in the U.S. Senate and a U.S. representative. Johnson is one of 4 other people who ever worked in all 4 federal elected positions. His term started with turmoil and would end with it, though his legacy isn't all bad. He designed the Great Society legislation, which expanded public broadcasting, Medicare, education, and arts, and rural development in the name of the war on poverty. Millions of U.S. citizens rose above the poverty line thanks to this legislation. Number 15. James K. Polk. James K. Polk was elected as the 11th President of the United States in 1845. Formerly the Governor of Tennessee and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Polk holds an unusual claim to fame, especially among modern-day politicians. When he was elected, he put forth a clear policy agenda, then went ahead and systematically achieved every goal on the list. He promised to only run for 1 term and made good on that promise as well. Some of his notable achievements include the annexation of Texas after winning the Mexican-American War, the construction of the U.S. Naval Academy and the Smithsonian Institute, and the introduction of the first postage stamp. Quite a list of accomplishments to achieve in just 4 years. Number 14. Woodrow Wilson. Before entering into politics directly, Woodrow Wilson earned a Ph.D. in political science at Johns Hopkins University and taught at different schools. At one point, he served as the former president of Princeton University and governor of New Jersey. Woodrow Wilson was sworn into office on March 4, 1913, making him the 28th president of the United States. He served in office when World War I broke out in Europe. In 1917, Wilson petitioned Congress to forget its isolationist ways so that the U.S. may enter the war on the side of the Allies. The United States joined the League of Nations, the predecessor to the United Nations, in 1919, thanks to the advocacy of President Wilson. Number 13. Andrew Jackson.
Some people call him Old Hickory, and you'll see his face every time you use a $20 bill.
The United States elected Andrew Jackson as the 7th president in 1829. Many consider him one of the founding fathers of the country. His service to the country began at the age of 13 when he worked as a courier for the Continental Army. He later became a lawyer and a driving force behind the formation of the state of Tennessee. Jackson also served as a military commander during the War of 1812, winning the Battle of New Orleans against the British. As president, he worked to limit the scope of both federal and state governments. Republican ideals he fought for during the American Revolution. Number 12. John Adams. He lived to the age of 90 years old, but that's not John Adams' only accomplishment. Adams graduated from Harvard in 1755 and went on to practice law. He accomplished a lot for America before he even became president. It started with his leadership of the opposition to the Stamp Act of 1765, imposed by the British Parliament. By the 1770s, Adams had become a revolutionary. He drafted the Massachusetts Constitution, a document still in effect today. Adams became the president in 1797 and was the first to live in the White House. At the start of his term, he brought about a peaceful end to the conflict between America and France. Number 11. Dwight D Eisenhower. Dwight D. Ike Eisenhower became the 34th president of the United States in 1952. Before his presidency, Eisenhower traveled to Korea to help sign the peace treaty, ending the Korean War. Eisenhower also served as a 5-star general and as the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe during World War II. He supervised the invasions of North Africa and was in charge of the Normandy landing in France on D-Day. As president, one of Eisenhower's most significant achievements included the establishment of the National Aeronautics and Space Agency, or NASA. In 1954, he also sent federal troops to enforce desegregation laws in Arkansas. Number 10. Bill Clinton. During the Vietnam War, Bill Clinton participated in war protests and organized a moratorium to end the war in Vietnam in 1969.
This young activist eventually graduated from Yale Law School and ran for the House of Representatives in 1974.
20 years later, he became the 42nd president of the United States. During Clinton's presidency, the United States experienced both the longest economic expansion in the country's history and the lowest unemployment rate in the late 30 years. In the first year of his term, Clinton enacted an initiative to fund community police officers. He also signed the Family and Medical Leave Act to help families that are taking care of a newborn or a sick family member. Number 9. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. People know him best as FDR, the president during World War II. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as the 32nd president of the United States from 1933 until his death in 1945. At the time of his presidency, term limits did not exist, so the country elected him as president 4 times. Roosevelt just so happened to preside over 2 major events. First, he led the nation through the Great Depression and created the New Deal, public works departments, and programs to help people back to work. One of those programs led to the construction of the Hoover Dam. Second was the arrival of World War II, where FDR joined Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin in their campaign to defeat Nazi Germany. Number 8. Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman first held the position of vice president and then moved on to the U.S. presidency after Franklin D. Roosevelt's passing in 1945. Roosevelt's death and Truman's ascension marked the first time succession ever happened during a presidency. Truman became the 33rd president, arriving in office during trying times. Not only was the nation grieving over the loss of FDR, but America was still in the last stages of World War II. The German military was defeated after he took office, but that left the nation of Japan to contend with. Facing the genuine possibility of losing over 1 million men fighting Japan, Truman authorized the use of nuclear bombs against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese military surrendered after those bombings, helping the U.S. successfully avoid a ground invasion from Japan. Number 7. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan became the 40th President of the United States on January 20, 1981. He once served as the governor of California, and before that, he was an actor in Hollywood. Reagan served 2 terms in the White House, starting from 1981 to 1989. His presidency began with a bang since he came to power during the Iran hostage crisis. One of his first acts in office was freeing the hostages. He then guided the United States through the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Reagan strengthened the U.S. economy and invested in military technologies that the Soviets could not match, ultimately leading the collapse of the USSR. Number 6. Barack Obama. Former President Barack Obama first worked as a civil rights attorney after graduating from Harvard Law School. In 1997, Obama became an Illinois state senator and then in 2005 served as a U.S. senator. 3 years later, he became the first black president of the United States. As the 44th U.S. president, Obama passed the $787 billion American Recovery and Reinvestment Act during the Great Recession. With this enactment, the employment rate dropped from 10% to 4.7%. As part of his 2008 presidential campaign, Obama promised to repeat the U.S. military's policy on barring openly gay, lesbian, or bisexual people from military service, known best as the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Act. By 2010, DADT ended. In Obama's second term, he advocated for full equality for queer Americans, the first president to do so. By 2015, the Supreme Court ruled same-sex marriage to be a fundamental right. Number 5. John F. Kennedy. Then we have JFK. John F. Kennedy served as the 35th President of the United States. In 1960, JFK turned 43 years old, meaning he was the second youngest president in American history. When Kennedy was younger, he served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. He won the Pulitzer Prize for the autobiography profiles in Courage. In 1963, before the end of his term, Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated him. Though his presidency was cut short, he accomplished much, such as successfully guiding the United States through the Cuban Missile Crisis. He also challenged NASA to land a man on the moon and return him safely, which the Apollo missions achieved. Number 4. Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln was elected into office as the 16th President of the United States on March 4, 1861.
His term began during a period of great upheaval in America. At the time, the country experienced conflict over the ethics of slavery, ultimately leading to the start of the Civil War. He only served 3 years until his death in 1864, after John Wilkes Booth famously shot him. His legacy long lived on after him, though. People know Lincoln best for his Gettysburg Address speech, reuniting the country after the Civil War, and of course, the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves and recognizing their rights as free men and women. Number 3. Thomas Jefferson. One of the original founding fathers, Jefferson had been involved in shaping the United States from its inception. He served as both the U.S. Minister to France and the Secretary of State. He also most notably authored the Declaration of Independence. In 1801, America elected him as the 3rd President of the United States. He left an indelible mark on the country's territorial expansion, with the purchase of Louisiana Territory from France in 1803. Jefferson was one of the most intelligent scholars of his time. JFK once remarked to a group of Nobel Prize winners that this is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. Number 2. Theodore Roosevelt. JFK was the second youngest to serve as president, but Teddy Roosevelt was the first, elected at age 42. Roosevelt was the 26th President of the United States and served from 1901 to 1909. While he was a great politician, he also spent his time as a historian, naturalist, author, and explorer. Before running for president, Roosevelt was the governor of New York and then vice president to William McKinley. He took over the McKinley's assassination. In 1898, he also left his position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to lead his famed group of Rough Riders, the first ever volunteer U.S. cavalry division during the Spanish-American War. Some of his many accomplishments include the creation of the U.S. Forestry Service, the federal protection of over 230 million acres of land, as well as the establishment of national parks and monuments. Many praise him for his diplomacy, reflected in his famous mantra of "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Nowadays, his likeness lives on as one of the 4 presidents' faces carved into Mount Rushmore. Who's the most influential American president? Before we tell you, let's ask you this. If you could become president of the United States, what do you think you'd be known for accomplishing or failing at? Let us know in the comments below. Number 1. George Washington. Then we have the first president of the United States ever. George Washington worked as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolution and became president on April 30th, 1789. Presiding over a brand new country, Washington forged ahead to build a strong and well-financed national government.
He wished to found a nation that could stand on its own, based on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
One of his most notable achievements was presiding over the creation of the U.S. Constitution. He also stepped down after 2 terms, starting the precedent that still exists today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our video, please give us a thumbs up. For more exciting videos from us, make sure you subscribe and that you've turned on that bell notification.